when you played a Johnny Miehaus team, you rarely ran into any kind of, well, you never ran into any kind of surprise. They may be a good team or a great team, or they might be a bad team, or they might be a mediocre team. But one thing about it was that no matter what their degree of ability was, no matter what that was, they were going to hit you. I mean, it was going to be a high top shoe bloodletting.
Lace them up, no.
Yeah, I mean that was the way he played, and that's the way his teams played. I played 1 year against him in high school. He was a senior running back at Manual, and I played against him. He was just lightning fast, and I forget what the score was. The year that we played one another, Manual beat us something, 4 touchdowns to 2 or 3 touchdowns to 1, something like that. And but he was another one of the real terrifically honest people. Never anything. You never had what you saw is what you got. There was never any subterfuge. There's never anything that wasn't on the table with him. Just like Paul Miller that way. And he I had a phone call yesterday from a fellow by the name of Paul Karam. Now, Karam is a very successful mortgage loan person around here for several years, a lot of years, and he played quarterback for St. X and eventually quarterback for Kentucky. He played for Johnny at St. X, and he called me up and he says, I need a little help. And he says, they tabbed me to do the eulogy tomorrow. On Friday for Johnny. And he says, I don't know what to do. I've never done anything like this before. And so, we had a little talk for a while and everything. But he touched an awful lot of people. And I never knew anything at all about his private life. I never ever met his wife. She was been deceased for several years. And after he was kind of out of the limelight and everything, I came across him someplace, and he was on his bicycle. And how you doing, John? What's going on? And so, well, what he was doing at the time, he was walking hots at Churchill Down, he was a hot walker out there. And well, he says you got to walk somewhere, and that's what he did. And, so he was a real character.
What was the relationship with Paulie Miller and him? Was it a good relationship
with Johnny? With Johnny? Oh yeah, it was a good relationship. Well, how should I put it? It was a very strong relationship with two people that had pretty much equal personalities. But it was fun to be around them.
Was a typical game with Flagey and St. X in terms of strategy? You said Miehaus was pretty well predictable.
Yeah, you knew what he was going to do.
What was the semantics of a game with them? What were you trying to do? Was it a matter of?
Well, in preparation for a game with him, you just took what your scouting report showed you for. It was always the last game of the year, and I had all year long to watch them and figure out what they were going to do. And they rarely did anything other than whatever the situation called. If a third and 9 on the 40-yard line they were going to do a certain thing, and it rarely was any different from that. I can only remember one thing. Well, actually, two things that he did, and I really can't I really can't reason what his reasonings were with them. And you're gonna think they're strange as I did. He started off the season with a punt return person that was inexperienced and everything like that. So the first game of the season, this punt returner called a fair catch on every punt. Made no difference where the punt was. I mean, it was he did a fair catch. Catch the ball and still have 20-yard separation. He did a fair catch. Well, the first game or two, you say, well, there's a green kid back there, and they just don't want to take any chances with him. But then the third game went on, the fourth game went on, and everything went on like that. The fair catches was being, called the whole time. And you could see it as you go along, and teams that were playing against them and everything each one were starting to cover that guy a lot looser than than you normally would.
Sure.
And sure enough, in our game, the last game of the season, very first punt, the guy took off and ran the football first time all year long. Ran the football. And there was another play that he used. It was a simple end around. The quarterback came back, and the end came around and took the ball in a reverse. And they did it all year long, and was quite successful with it. Let me say now. Did they give it to? Yeah, they gave it to this end on them, all the way around. And at the end of the year, when they played us, they used a misdirection, and the quarterback kept the ball, And in all the years and everything, there's the only two incidents that I could say where he did something that, wasn't, that we didn't have programmed, But there again, you can almost say, well, he's leading up to something, when he was doing.
Yeah,
and,
that's predictable in itself, yeah.
And otherwise, it was just hard-nosed, knocky-socky when you played them. And that of course helped us out quite a bit.
Sure.
Because we were able to do anything. Even after we had the guns, well, we were still very innovative. I mean, you mentioned a couple of times, the double quarterback and the center between the quarterback's legs that could develop into a punt or a regular play, and things like that. We used a defense. We used a defense that I don't think anybody's ever figured it out even to this day. You generally use it on first down, 1st and 10. Naturally, you like 1st and 10. You like to be 2nd and long. You don't want to come out there 2nd and 4 or something like it. You like to be 2nd and 8. And what we had was actually it was an 8-man line on one side of the line of scrimmage and 7-man line on the other side of the line of scrimmage. And if you can visualize the football field, you have the hash mark, from the sideline into the hash mark. And back then, as it still is in the college game, the hash mark was pretty far over. Not like the pros where they're practically playing in the center field all the time. But the other side. So you had a short side of the field and a long side of the field. And so what we would do, we would on the long side of the field, we had a 4-man front, a 4-man line, a man in each slot. And they were in a big position to stop anything that went inside. And so, of course, it had to be covered from the outside, too. And on the other side of the line, where the tight side of the line, we had only three men, and they were head up on the guard and the tackle and the end. And they were head up on them. And their job was just to hit and to hold right there. on the line of scrimmage, whereas these slot guys were all knife and hard, and the tendency being to run to the long side of the field. We'd sometimes throw that thing in there, and when you first looked at it, you might see the guys all in the slot, and then there was an 8-man line. But actually it wasn't, so that gave us the extra man on the outside that could cover, in the secondary. And we might only use it maybe 2 or 3 times in a ball game, and always on first down. And I don't think that, right to this day, I don't think a whole lot of people ever remembered how it worked. And of course, those kind of things kind of went to the wayside when they started using a lot of men in motion and wide flankers and wide outs. But there was a minimum back in those days, and so from a defensive stand, that was very productive for us. Oh boy, that really. If they hit it, if they hit it in the right place, it could be a problem. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the people you had on that short side over there, they better be good folks. But that was a hallmark of Paulie. I mean, right straight on through, all the way. I mean, innovative right up to the, as much as possible to be as always have something up his sleeve. Sure. But St. X was not that, and to this day.
They still are.
To this day, it's almost exactly the same philosophy. Of course, Mike was coached by Johnny Miehaus. Mike Glazer was coached by John, and I don't know whether you know this or not, but Mike never played college football. Okay. And here he's the dean of coaches around here, and with more wins than anybody. Yeah. And he never played college football. Yeah, got his career development. But he's a student of the game.
And, I always felt St. X was, they knew what they were going to do. You just had to stop them, which was hard to do.
I see that in the paper this morning that they got a young man, one of just 8 in the state. It's one of these big national merit scholars. Mm-hmm. I mean, from nationwide.
Nationwide, yeah.
I think there was one from Manual, one from St. X, one from Sacred Heart, one from Assumption, one from Country Day, I think. Okay. It was in the paper this morning. It's supposed to be a big thing.
It is a big thing.
Yeah.
Well, let me set the stage here a little bit. This is the 5th session, and it's April 22nd, 2009. We're at home of Jim Miller, and we have begun today talking about the legendary St. X coach Johnny Miehaus, who passed away this week, and getting some of Jim's thoughts about their relationship and the relationship of Flagey and St. X. I thought what we would do today, we left off in our last session with the beginnings of the Thoroughbreds in the late 50s and how that came about, and I'm going to ask Jim maybe to begin there at the point where the Thoroughbreds actually came into existence, and then we're going to, I guess the title of this session might be Down the Glory Road of the years of the championships, and we're going to take as long as we need to try to highlight each of those and what Jim's memories are of the course and of the experience of competing, which became such a big part of the Thoroughbreds. So Jim, if you would, let's begin by telling us again a little bit about how the Thoroughbreds came into existence and what were the preparations early on as far as competition was concerned.
Okay. Competition, of course, was the driving force about the motivator to better yourself as a performer, as a singer, and just wanting to do better was the driving force of the group of guys within the Louisville chapter that finally decided that they had to do something, that they weren't getting what they wanted out of, the sociable part of the deal. They wanted something more than social activity, and as just plain members of that chapter, we weren't able to get it. It just wasn't possible to attain. And I think we went over the fact that in the election for chapter officers for the year of 1958, which was right at the end of 1957, we rigged the election. When I say that, I'm saying that what we did was had our block of men that we had about 25 or some 25 or 27 guys or something like that, who were already knew ahead of time that they were going to vote as a block on a given candidate. Candidates could be nominated from the floor and everything. And I know I was nominated from the floor, and I was designated loser. I mean, I wasn't to win, by our people anyway. And so before it was all over with, before they actually caught on to the thing, we had control of the board of directors for 1958. And then, of course, the monkey was on our back then to win the qualifying contest, the district contest in the fall of 58. And now wait a minute, I do have my dates a little bit wrong. I told you it was 57 for the year of 58.
Yeah, that's right.
And so we worked very hard. We could and worked very hard, and we managed to win the district competition in Lafayette, Indiana, in October of '58, and that gave us the qualifying shot at the international contest in Chicago the following summer. And had we not have won that, I don't know what would have happened, to tell you the truth. Because that was the basis that we wanted. We wanted to sing seriously enough, to win that contest and qualify. And before that, they were always second. We were always beaten by the northern Indiana groups. But we did manage to win it. And 24 guys and 27 guys, something like that, and qualified to go to Chicago. And our musical coaching and was from one of our people, a fellow by the name of Ed Hackett. Hackett was the son of a very well-to-do family across the river in New Albany. And I think they were in the coal business or something back in and Ed, as a young man, really didn't have to work very much. And one of the things he did, he sang in a quartet that on a professional side, on stage. And I don't know exactly where or how, whether it was a circuit they were on, but I do know that he did sing professionally in a barbershop quartet, and was one of the very first early members of the society. And at the time, and he was with us. He was part of the group that wanted to, that became the Thoroughbred, that broke off. And that's a misnomer. We didn't break off. They broke off much after we got control. Okay. So anyway, Ed Hackett was very well versed in the barbershop idiom, so to speak. And as a matter of fact, he was an international judge. And at the time, there was 5 categories, judging categories, and he was certified in 2 of them. And they don't let that happen anymore. But back then, there was a couple of people that were certified in all 5 categories, and that way things were done back in the early days, And so he was the musical backup for everything. Benner, of course, was, I told him before, he was a genius, and he caught on to whatever had to be done pretty quickly. And so Ed Hackett was the coach and inspiration most for everything. And we did have a couple of other judges in the chapter. A fellow by the name of Joe Cutzinger which you might have, I don't know whether you ever knew Joe or
I
not.
knew his wife.
Yeah,
I knew
oh
her.
yeah, Margaret.
Yeah.
Joe was a certified judge in the old, what they called stage presence category. And so he was a big help, particularly in our relationship with the judging program and the communication with that program. And there was another guy in the chapter, but his name was Bing Crosby. Bing being a nickname, of course, and he lived across the river, and he primarily was involved with the chapter in New Albany over there, which was the head in those days. But he was certified in a what they called a category of voice expression, or was it balance and play? I don't know, any one of the categories. And so we had some help, from that standpoint. And but the main thing came from Benner and Hackett, and so that was the first thing that we had going for us. They had to win that contest, in which we did, and so we qualified to go to Chicago. And it was a funny thing back then. We really didn't expand very much membership-wise in that thing. I think we won with 24 guys, and I think we competed with 27. So we didn't really take on a whole bunch of new members through that time. And looking back, I guess it was mostly on account of Benner. He just didn't want anybody green in there, He wanted everybody as experienced as possible to be in there. And so that period from October of 57 through June of 58, I'm from October 57 through the qualification in June was pretty intense. I'm trying to think. Our meeting place, and a little interesting story about that. When we first met, there used to be a tavern right at the corner of, right across from Bowman Field, catty corner from Bowman Field, at that intersection up there.
Sure.
And there was a tavern there that gasoline station is there now, and it was Kingsley Inn. The little city there was the city of Kingsley, and it was called Kingsley Inn. And I know we'd meet up in the upstairs on the second floor of that place. They had a room up there that they let us have, and it was pretty intense, and we ran at it really hot and heavy and everything. And finally went to the contest in Chicago, and that would have been in the summer of '59, and the difference in the way things are done nowadays it's remarkable, because the things that they watch for from a judging standpoint, the non-musical things were astounding, laughable when you think about them now. We wore white, remember the white buck shoes?
Yes. Yeah.
And so that there was a designated guy with a, what they call them, bunny bag. He had a designated guy there to take out any smudges on the thing. And when we moved around in Chicago between the dressing rooms and everything like that, they had plastic bags that they tie around your shoes. And if you wore a handkerchief in your breast pocket, it had to be identical. No jewelry, couldn't wear a watch, no watch or rings or anything. You were allowed to wear your wedding ring, and anything else was verboten. And that's the type of thing that was part of the what they called the stage presence category, and that involved the visual presentation that you did. And so there was very little movement. I don't know what kind of coverage you got. Before, we had a big heavy movement, and we did South Rampart Street Parade, and it came to a part where way down yonder in the cane brake, you know, that deal there, you know, and that's a lot of something make. Anyway, it was, the first thing was everybody right over, way down yonder in the cane brake, what the way to, you know, turn the hands over, you know.
That's big.
Oh, it's choreography, you know. Oh, my. And there was the one we really were really going to knock them dead with was had a tag at South Rampart Street, parade, boom, parade, and so on the risers they'd be standing in normal position, you know, but then up on the top row they'd start doing a side step. Da 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 da, and then you'd be where you go, but or wherever we stopped. But then the second row, they didn't move. See, until you went da da, then they moved da da. The third row, you know, oh my, that was the big deal. Oh my, did you see those guys do that? And so on a today basis, it was very primitive. You know, when we get to thinking about it, but we did really well. We came in 8th. I thought we won the thing, and but we came in 8th, and we did sing well. We sang well, and we were beaten by a multi-champion at the time, Pekin, Illinois. I'd already won a championship. They were winning their second one, and eventually won 3 of them. And when I heard them up there, boy, that's when I realized that there was more to it than what we were doing. I mean, they came, they were singing and in a warm-up deal, up, you know, and give you an idea, one of the guys said to me, "Look at that guy's shoes." One guy had a pair of shoes on that wasn't quite exactly like the rest of them, you know. And boy, that'll get them. They're finished. You can't do that. And of course, the guy, they just put him in the back row, and nobody, you know. But those are that's the way the thinking ran.
Yeah.
But they had about 40 guys. And they were warming up, and the first thing they started off, in old Savannah, you know, just a big introduction, you know. And back in those days, what you did a lot of times, and to achieve that ring, you know, or what they thought was a ring, and they did a pseudo whip, putting a way up in their nose, you know, oh Savannah, you know, like that. Yeah. But they hit that thing, and it just all over, you know, and holy cow. You know, I never quite heard anything like that before. So that was a big education for me just to be in that thing. Competition-wise, I can handle the competition part of it, but that technique, that, you know, was something we had never tried before. I mean, we were just as energetic, but it just didn't quite happen that way. So that was the very first competition for the chapter, and as a little bit of a sidelight to that, as far as the health of the chapter was concerned, we just completely ignored anything except that competitive effort. I mean, administratively, you know, it was, we paid a whole lot of attention to it. And we had, in the chapter, we had 3 guys that let us bill ourselves as the richest baritone section in the society. Had 3 doctors in there. I may have already mentioned him. I don't know. A fellow, Dr. Bob Likens. They were all X-ray guys. What do you call them?
Radiologists. Maybe.
Radiologists. Yeah, they were all radiologists. And Dr. Bob Likens and Dr. John Smith, who lived in Anchorage out there, and Dr. Howard Blackburn. And they were all well-to-do guys. Now, Dr. Blackburn was he had multiple hobbies. I mean, he loved to sing barbershop, and he was a sports car enthusiast also. But his big thing was railroads, model railroads, as well as the real stuff. And he made arrangements for us to go to Chicago. Now we had 24 guys and some wives. And then we went to Chicago, the bulk of us anyway, went to Chicago in a private car of the president of the Illinois Central Railroad. They tacked it on the back of something on the way up there. And that's the way we went to Chicago. And I don't know what it cost or anything or how we did it, but anyway, that was the way we went to Chicago. And the $2,200 in bonds that we took over when it was just, everything went out the window. We came back from Chicago broke, dead broke. But so that was the initial go into it. And I don't know whether I've ever told you about this before, whether I've even told it on the camera here. But when we came back from Chicago, and we were 8th place, and the chapter was broke, and we didn't really have any place to, to meet or anything, and the chapter could have very, very easily just fallen apart. I mean, Hackett was still there, and Benner, of course, was still there, and those, but we, you know how it is after a contest. There's a certain bunch of guys that they've been putting off their vacation, and so they got to go off for a while, and other guys, their wives are sick and tired of it, so they got to go off for a while. And then was the same thing with us. With 27 guys, and we were down to about 20 guys that were coming around on a Monday night whenever we found a place to meet. And of course, 3 months later, we would normally defend the district championship, qualification for the 1960. And we could have very easily just folded up because we were down to about 20 guys, and you had to have 20 guys on stage, and that was a part of the qualification. And so we were down to 20 guys. We didn't really have a place to meet, and it was a serious thought about not going to, not competing in the district. And that was, I thought it was a terrible situation. And finally we decided that since we were the district representatives the previous year, that we had to show up. We were just, just to do that. And so we got together, and we showed up in Evansville the following year. And I don't know whether I think I've told you this story, but whether I've done it on camera or not, I don't know. But at that time, Gary, Indiana group up there were very disturbed about getting beat the year before. And they came in, they were really loaded for bear. And this is the first time I met Ed Gentry, was right in this genre of time, right in through there. And Gentry was the certified arrangement guy, the music guy, and it got across that that Gary was going to sing a certain song called "So Tired." And back in those days, "So Tired" apparently was one of the songs that just didn't qualify as a barbershop vehicle. And so several weeks ahead of time, a couple months anyway, and Gentry came to them that they were going to use this song, and Gentry told them, don't use that song. It's not a barbershop vehicle, and don't use it. And they used it anyway. And so in the contest, we sang pretty well, but they sang better. They sang better than we sang. But they used that song, and Gentry gives them a 35. And so here we are, we're qualified again to go to Dallas. And it was all over the fact that he warned them. He said, don't use the song. It's not a barbershop vehicle. And they used it anyway. And then he did what he called, he says, I'll give you, on something like that, I'll give you a showing up score. He said, I'll give you a 35. And he always said that he says, he says, I asked him why he didn't, maybe disqualified him, and he said, I won't ever disqualify you. But he says, I'll see that you don't win. And this was all ahead of time, took place. And he told me, he gave him a 35, and we won the contest by 5 or 10 points that way. And so now we're in a similar situation. What are we going to do now? And Benner comes up and he said, well, I'm not going to go to Dallas unless we have 40 men. And unless we have 40 men, that's what he said. And so we had to decide whether or not we were going to, back out of that or what we had to do. And that's when, you start to pull your socks up and start to go to work. And so we got out and got members. We doubled our salary. We showed up with 41 guys to go to Dallas. Didn't have any money. We went to a bank. He signed a promissory note with 41 signatures on it. I don't think you can do that now. And that's the way we used to go to all the conventions, really. It was just sign the note, go borrow the money and sign the note, and pay it back in 90 days or whatever. And so then we did. That's the way we went to Dallas. And we missed the medals in Dallas by, 3 or 4 points. And that was enough. That was the time when everybody said, well, now we can do it. And so, man, we really went to work really seriously. And the following year, we qualified again. And we were becoming district. The power in the district then by that time. And so we won the district again, qualified to go to Philadelphia. And we lost a couple of people. We only had 39 men when we went to Philadelphia. But lost the championship by 1 point to Bob Johnson's Dundalk thing. And they looked like We the People up there, 140 guys, 145 guys, something like that. And there's a lot of people say, well, we really won. But I don't think that. They won a contest, but 1 point is that's pretty close.
Yeah, that's awful close.
And so that was the second year, and by this time now, Benner was starting to become obsessed with the idea of winning that thing. And and it was an unhealthy obsession. It wasn't it wasn't, I don't know how else to describe it, but he was becoming a little unbearable looking back on it, I didn't know it at the time, but by the time we got to the third one we went to, of course, was Philadelphia. And the next year we qualified again, and we're going to go to Kansas City, and we won in Kansas City. But during the preparations for that, I was a chapter president by that time, and I didn't really know, but there were things going on that I wasn't really aware of. Benner was qualifying guys and getting rid of guys. And I know we had several people that decided to drop out and would never, and I was concerned about it, but I'm into the business of competition, and if I didn't know any difference, I'd assume, well, the going's a little tough and you don't want it, so sayonara. But I did find out then that he was making it particularly hard on people, running them off if he possibly could. And the way I found it out, I had a first cousin that was in the group. And I found it out, I didn't find it out until years later. We just happened to mention it about what had happened, and he told me about how he finally got to a point where he couldn't stand it anymore and just dropped out. And so I regret that. But I didn't know about it. But Benner was starting to become pretty unbearable, really. So then, of course, as you let me know now if you want me to go in a different direction here. But then after they win,
what were the songs? What did the course sing?
Oh, okay. I'm trying to remember them. The first The first championship, I believe, was South Rampart Street Parade, and I think it was Kentucky's Way of Sin. Good morning.
Okay.
The second one in Dallas. Boy, I can't hardly think of. I can't even remember what they were. The third one in Philadelphia was the Smile medley. When you're smiling and keep your sunny side up medley.
Yeah.
And I think South Rampart Street Parade again. That was a championship year.
Okay.
And then of course, you know, the big bomb hit when a week after after we won the contest in '62, a week later he came back and we did a show across the river for a fraternal organization over in New Albany. And when the show was over, and it was a great show and everything, he said, "I've had it. I'm out of barbershopping, and I'll see you." And it was a complete surprise. Like I said, I was a chapter president and didn't know a thing about it from that standpoint, and I also sang a quartet with Benner. The Derby Towners Quartet was, you know, we were district champs and one thing or another, and I remember I said, "Well, what about the quartet?" And he says, "I'm out of everything." And that's the way it happened. You know, with no notice, no anything, and he stood pretty much by that. He never barbershopped another day. I think he directed some of the women for a while, maybe, but never barbershopped another day. And so there we were again. It could have very easily, you know, but we did have a bunch of guys that could take care of what needed to be done. You know, whether or not it was designated for them to do this and that. I didn't think just guys would grab on and say, "Well, this has to be done," or "This has to be done," and say they do it. And we were very fortunate that way. And so Joe Wise was with us by that time, and Joe was one of the few musically educated guys around. And so Joe became the director, and things just kind of happened because the guys made it happen. I mean, when they, you know, I can't really describe it except that they, you know, when something had to be done or somebody got it done. And as a matter of fact, we grew a little, you know, grew in membership a little bit. Then we instigated the thing the following year. We took the whole chorus to the '63 convention, which was in Toronto, and we took the whole chapter up there and instituted a custom that hadn't been done before, but it's been done every year since, and that's when we did a performance that sang the trophy away. Did a 20-minute performance and presented the trophy to the new champions. And that all came off extremely well. From a quartet standpoint, we had a couple of quartets in the contest. The Derby Towners got another baritone and a new bass, and hired Bonkowski and I, and we did very poorly. When we went to the contest, we come in somewhere around 30th or something like that. And we'd been up right around the top 20 before, but and then Clubhouse 4 was just starting to come along, and they were in that contest up there. And so things went pretty well. At the end of, without expanding too much on this, at the end of that time, the new chapter president and which was Schrader Miller, who we had talked about before. He was the chapter president, sang lead with the Clubhouse Four. And Ed Hackett, who was the father confessor for everybody. And they decided that Joe needed help, and that's when they asked me to become a co-director with Joe. And so that's the way that started off. And that's when, and then we finally, that's where we made right along in that time, around 1963, going through there is when we made a connection with the old VFW post that was right there on Sharon Avenue, which is now the Trinity Auditorium. It was a VFW post. Of course, they, really built it all up and expanded it and remodeled it and everything. But it was just a square old building with, and we were there for many years. And things kind of, the first contest we were in, we qualified to go to Boston. She had to lay out 3 years. So we won in '62. And so we were eligible to go back in '65. And we qualified to go back in '65. And the first contest that we did was with Joe directing one song and me directing one song. And we got beat by the Miamians from Florida, and they beat us 1 point. Another 1 point loss.
How about that?
So our first time back in, we came in second by 1 point. And I still hear from guys that were involved with that, Troy, when back in those days they put the top 5 choruses on a Decca recording and used a studio somewhere in the convention town, record recording studio. So as soon as the contest was over with and they caught out the thing, they rushed the champions in and they recorded first, and then the second place, third place. So when they were inside the studio doing their recording and we had arrived on the outside, we had all the thoroughbreds, and I can't remember how many it would be, 50, maybe, 50, 60 guys, something like that. And in the corridors outside, we lined up thoroughbreds on both sides of the corridor. When they came out of the studio, the thoroughbreds, as they walked through the corridor, the thoroughbreds applauded them. And I still have guys that were in that chorus that are still around will comment about that. And that was one of the things that gave the thoroughbreds, the class label that they picked up so much back in those days. And but I still hear, if I get around if I get around any one of those guys, they'll always comment about that to me. The next year, of course, we won it pretty handily in Chicago, and they still talk about that one. That was very innovative. That was the first time that anybody had ever utilized the whole chorus moving around a little bit, such as they did. It wasn't all that much movement. We did the Mardi Gras March, and it was "Here Come the Big Brass Band," "See the Leader Waving to You," "Happy Days, Glad to See You," and then finally the same thing. There was an interlude, and then the same thing happened. And so the first time, the choreography was that the director moved across the stage just like we did it in '81, and the whole chorus were spectators. Here comes the big brass band. But then in the last part of the song, it said there'll be dancing in the streets of New Orleans, and during that preparation, and here I'm the chorus now looking at you, the audience, and what happened was the chorus separated on both sides like this, leaving a the middle group in the middle, and the middle group then became the band, and here now the spectators were here, you know. Well, you know, it's pretty primitive, you know, when you look back on it, but it was an absolute sensation back in 66, and that plus the uniforms. The uniforms were snow white tails, full dress tails, white tie, white, everything white, socks, shoes, the whole 9 yards is all solid white. That nobody ever done anything like that before. And as a matter of fact, sometimes when we're not on camera, I'll tell you a little story about how some people, there was a group from up in New Jersey. They were the family of the Dapper Dan chorus from up there. And this one lady was describing about the next chorus that'll be out will be the Thoroughbreds from Louisville, and they're very proper. They're very traditional. They'll be dressed all in black tuxedos, and there may be a little splash of color around the cummerbund or something like that, but they'll be very, very properly dressed and everything like that. And the curtain opened, and she had a, yeah, you know, expletive. And they were sitting right next to all our people, you know, up in McCormick Place up in Chicago. And so we really had a reputation of being very innovative and, you know, doing things for the first time. And so by this time now, as a matter of fact, when I first joined as a leader in the leadership capacity, then immediately that's when we brought Gentry in. And we brought Gentry in, and he and Hackett then became the music brains behind it all.
Let's talk about that just a minute. What you said you noticed even in the first contest that the Pekin course was doing something better or different than you all were doing. Now at 66, what had you all done in those years musically to say, okay, suddenly we're on top of the game? Had something evolved during that time that?
Something had evolved, but at the time it really didn't manifest itself all that well in the actual performance. It was, am I explaining this right? We had the theory going, and we knew there was something else that we had to do, but we hadn't developed it into a training program yet. As a matter of fact, it wasn't even completely designed yet. Gentry was working on it, and which we didn't really know at the time, but we had probably were starting to gain a little bit by the time 66 came around. We were gaining a little bit more of a musical feel, and let me explain that by saying barbershoppers up at that time pretty much didn't really have a whole heck of a lot of respect for the music itself. I mean, the only thing that they cared about, or the song itself, let me put it that way, the thing that they cared about was the chord and the sequence of chords and the way that chords could be manipulated and connected, and that was the big thing for them, is ring a chord and you get one that really sounded good and then just hang on to it. They didn't care anything particular. Well, not quite true, but they didn't pay strict attention to meter and to proper time and that kind of thing. If its chord sounded good, lean on that baby, you know. And if it didn't sound good, get back at it, you know. So from a musical performance standpoint, it was starting to show up that way. A little bit more of feeling for accuracy in terms of the ensemble sound. that's one thing that we don't explain today like we should, that we're singing in an ensemble. And by definition, an ensemble is that everything has to be done exactly the same way by everybody, as opposed to a soloist. Soloists can do anything they want, but an ensemble has to sing exactly the same way. Well, they don't have to, but I mean, that's part of the way, that's what they pay off on. And so in order for an ensemble to sing exactly the same way, there has to be some series of rules or some method that they're going to go by to create that business of me and Troy singing the same thing at the same time. And of course, what that was going to be, of course, had to be first devised. And then after you devised what made the best quality and what made the best singing and everything like that, then it also had to be, once you knew what it was, you had to know how to train in order to get it completely synchronized, completely precise. And that was starting to take place in theory only back in the 60s. By 1969, when we came to the next one now, there was a little bit more manifest, particularly in the idea of meter and correct number of beats and measures and stuff like that. I mean, we're becoming more cognizant of that, and the very, 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 very small amounts of syllable connection was starting to take place. If I can back up a little bit to the early days, the one judging category, the voice expression judge, had to hear every attack and every release of every word. I mean, that's one of the things I take it back. It wasn't the BE guy, it was the harmony accuracy guy. He had to hear the attack precisely and the release precisely. Now, what that did, of course, was to completely compartmentalize almost every beat.
Sure.
We like the folks who say hello in just a way they let you know. That's what you come up.
Yeah.
They're glad to see you back again, and they hate to see you go. And each one of those hard consonants, those T's and those K's and everything like that, just sliced right into the, into the flow of the music. And we were starting to rebel against that a little bit and getting by with a little bit more of it, and it was starting to happen. By the time we got to the 69, we were so far ahead of everybody, and we were making it happen a little bit, and it was so subtle that we were getting by with it. I mean, people were accepting it because it sounded better.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there were other things that were, taking place, but mostly it was becoming, back in those days, better, more respect for music in general was starting to take place.
How do you feel the stature that you've described of the Thoroughbreds, the respect that you garnered in the early 60s, how much did that help the Thoroughbreds lead the development of the acceptance of a new sound and a new way of looking at the music? Do you feel like that had anything to do with it? Or
they became they became the spearhead of the whole movement of getting paying more attention to the integrity of the music and the integrity of the tempo, and all of that was starting to happen because it just so happened that it fell on us because we were the first to do it, having been in the very beginning of it, because Gentry was the guy that did it all. I can go back, and I don't know whether I've ever told you this or not either, but Gentry was an engineer and a self-taught musician, and he realized that this medium that we were dealing with could be better accepted and everything if it were, a little bit more along musical lines, proper musical lines. And you'd have to classify his being a thinker. I mean, he had his easy chair and he'd all night long smoke a pipe and think about what ought to happen. And so he realized that there could be an academic approach to this thing. And he would research vocal techniques and vocal people. And whenever he would come across one that wrote a thesis or wrote a book or whatever it might be where he felt that he could use that in the application of barbershop harmony, he'd write him a letter. Or he might call him on the phone. And eventually he'd go see him. And so he, back in the 60s, he became on a first name basis with some of the top vocal teachers on a collegiate level in the country. I can only remember, of course I remember Appleman from Indiana University. He was big guy nationwide. And Louis Appleman was, he liked that barbershop because it was a great vehicle. He could show, what he was looking for all the time. He could show that it would show the results of a finely tuned chord and matched word sounds and not so much linking of syllables. He didn't fool around with that very much. But the other part of it, it was a great vehicle for him to use in the teaching end of it. And the fellow by the name of Vennard, I can't think of what his first name was, but he was from some university. I mean, there was 4 or 5 of these guys that Gentry became intimate with. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I mean, Gentry, he got under their skin too. And they got so that they could, they became part of his, it became his friends. And as a result of all this is the way Gentry